twins, yet worlds apart. Claire Monroe lives in the shadow of her parents' favoritism, her every effort eclipsed by Sister Emily's spotlight. Same grades, same sacrifices, but only Emily's celebrated. A lavish rooftop gala pushes it to the edge until Claire unveils a truth they never saw coming, shattering their perfect tale. From overlooked to undeniable, this is a fight for recognition you'll feel in your bones. Hit play. This night flips the script, and Claire's moment is one you won't want to miss. The kitchen of the Monroe family home in Cleveland buzzed with the quiet chaos of preparation, the air thick with the scent of vanilla and buttercream. Linda Monroe stood at the counter, her hands deftly arranging a tower of gourmet cupcakes on a tiered silver stand, each swirl of frosting a perfect testament to her meticulous care. The late afternoon sun slanted through the window, catching the edges of her auburn hair and the faint lines of concentration on her face. Claire Monroe lingered by the fridge, her fingers tracing the edge of her newly framed medical school diploma. Its ink still crisp, with the promise of 4 grueling years finally paid off. She'd come home to share the milestone, hoping for a moment of pride. Instead, she got a knife to the heart. "She deserves it more, honey," Linda said, not even glancing up from her task. The words slipped out casually, as if she were commenting on the weather, not dismantling Claire's world. "Emily's always been more dedicated to her studies. You've always had other interests." The dismissal hit harder than a slap, a sting that radiated through Claire's chest and left her breathless. She stood rooted to the linoleum floor, the diploma suddenly heavy in her hands, its gold seal mocking her. "Mom," she started, her voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers. "We both graduated with honors. We had the exact same GPA, 3.98. I don't understand why you and Dad paid off all of Emily's loans, but none of mine." Linda sighed, a sound Claire knew too well, exasperation tinged with mild disappointment, and finally looked up. Her hazel eyes, so like Claire's own, narrowed slightly as she set a cupcake down with deliberate care. "Claire, your sister doesn't have a wealthy mentor like Dr. Eleanor Grayson taking an interest in her future. You've always had advantages Emily didn't." The words hung between them, sharp and accusing, as if Claire's hard-earned opportunities were a crime. She almost laughed, a bitter sound catching in her throat. Dr. Grayson, renowned neurosurgeon, silver-haired force of nature, hadn't handed her anything. Claire had earned that mentorship through 80-hour weeks in the lab, hunched over microscopes while Emily was off skiing in Aspen with their parents, her lift tickets funded by the same bank account that now left Claire drowning in debt. "Advantages?" Claire echoed, her voice rising despite her effort to stay calm. "You mean working myself to exhaustion while Emily got your emotional and financial support? I stayed up nights analyzing data, Mom, while you and Dad were cheering at her volleyball games." Linda's lips pursed, a familiar sign she was done with the conversation, but Claire pressed on. "I don't get it. We're twins, same grades, same degree, same sacrifices. Why does she get a clean slate, and I'm stuck with $120,000 in loans?" The kitchen door swung open, and Robert Monroe stepped in, his broad shoulders filling the frame. He'd been outside, probably tinkering with the old grill for tomorrow's party, and his flannel shirt carried the faint scent of charcoal. He slid an arm around Linda's shoulders, a united front forming before Claire's eyes. "No one's punishing you, Claire," he said, his tone calm but firm, the voice he used when settling disputes at his accounting firm. "We're just being practical. Emily needs more help than you do. You've always been more resourceful." Resourceful. The word landed like a stone, sinking into the pit of Claire's stomach. It was their go-to excuse, the catch-all they'd wielded for years to justify the gap between their daughters. Resourceful was why they'd skipped her undergraduate research presentations, hours she'd spent perfecting slides on neurovascular repair while flying cross-country for Emily's volleyball tournaments. Resourceful was why Emily got a shiny new Honda for her 21st birthday, while Claire unwrapped a $25 gas station gift card with a scribbled, "Happy Birthday." Resourceful was their shorthand for not showing up, for assuming Claire could fend for herself while they poured their attention into Emily. "So I'm being punished for finding my own way?" Claire asked, the hurt seeping into her voice despite her best efforts. She clutched the diploma tighter, its frame digging into her palms. Robert shook his head, his graying brows knitting together. "It's not punishment, Claire. It's reality. Emily's path has been tougher. She needed the boost. You've got Doctor, Grayson, a whole network. You'll figure it out. Claire stared at them, the weight of their logic pressing down on her. Figure it out. She'd been figuring it out since she was a kid, teaching herself calculus when tutors were reserved for Emily's chemistry struggles, working part-time at a campus cafe to cover books while Emily's rent came straight from their checking account. And now, after matching her twins' every academic stride, she was still the one left to fend for herself. "Tomorrow's Emily's debt-free celebration, right?" she said, her voice flat. "Your idea, I assume?" Linda nodded, a flicker of enthusiasm breaking through her reserve. "Of course. We've invited the whole family, her friends, even some professors. It's a big deal. Graduating medical school debt-free." Claire's jaw tightened. The invitations, she'd seen them, celebrating Emily's achievement in bold script, as if erasing Claire's identical diploma from the narrative. "I need to head out," she said abruptly, grabbing her bag from the counter. "Early shift at the hospital tomorrow." "Will you still make it to Emily's party?" Linda asked, a trace of concern finally creeping into her tone, not for Claire, but for how her absence might dim Emily's spotlight. Claire paused at the door, her hand on the knob. "I'll be there," she promised, though the words tasted bitter, twisting her stomach into knots. She stepped outside, the cool Cleveland air hitting her face as she crossed the driveway to her beat-up sedan, the same car she'd nursed through med school with duct tape and determination. As she slid into the driver's seat, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, the screen lighting up with a text from Dr. Eleanor Grayson. "Need to speak with you urgently about the Patterson Fellowship. Big news." Claire stared at the words, her pulse quickening. The Patterson Fellowship, Johns Hopkins, the holy grail of neurosurgical research. A cold realization settled over her like frost. Her parents' favoritism wasn't just unfair, it was about to be exposed in a way they couldn't ignore. And tomorrow, at Emily's celebration, there'd be no hiding from what was coming. She started the engine, the rumble drowning out the ache in her chest, and pulled away from the house where she'd always been second best. The Cleveland skyline faded into a gray smear as Claire Monroe drove south toward Michigan, the hum of her sedan's engine a steady pulse beneath her racing thoughts. The dashboard clock glowed 7:42 a.m., the early light cutting through a thin layer of morning fog. She'd barely slept after leaving her parents' house, the sting of Linda and Robert's words. "Emily needs more help than you do," looping in her mind like a broken record. Her medical school diploma sat on the passenger seat, its frame catching the sun, a silent reminder of the equality her parents refused to see. Now, Dr. Eleanor Grayson's cryptic text, "Big news about the Patterson Fellowship," pulled her toward the medical school campus, a lifeline she couldn't yet grasp. As the miles ticked by, memories unfurled, painting the roots of the rift she'd always felt but never named. Claire and Emily Monroe had entered the world 6 minutes apart, twins born under the same Cleveland snowstorm. Claire came first, quiet and watchful, her hazel eyes tracking the nurse's every move. Emily followed, her cries loud and insistent, a herald of the energy that would define her. Family lore loved that story, Linda cradling Emily's wails while Robert marveled at Claire's stillness, as if those first moments set their paths in stone. By childhood, the pattern was clear. Emily was the spark, blonde curls bouncing as she raced across soccer fields, her laughter filling the house with friends who adored her. Claire was the shadow, hours lost in the local library, her nose buried in books about constellations or sea creatures. Her victories quieter, but no less hard-won. Their parents noticed Emily first. Linda stitched banners for her dance recitals. Robert coached her soccer team through muddy springs. Claire's triumphs, a telescope she'd built from scavenged parts winning a science fair, a biology project on frog habitats earning a blue ribbon, got a nod over dinner, a "good work, Claire," before the conversation swung back to Emily's latest goal. By high school, the divide deepened. When both girls announced their dream of medicine at 16, sitting across from each other at the kitchen table, Linda beamed at Emily. "That's my girl, determined as ever." For Claire, Robert's brow furrowed. "Med school's tough, Claire. It's not just smarts, it's grit. You sure you're up for it?" The doubt stung, but she nodded, her jaw tight. Ohio State became their proving ground, the twins sharing a dorm, but carving separate lives. Claire balanced a 4.0 GPA with shifts at the campus library, her paycheck stretching to cover lab fees and ramen dinners. Emily faltered. Organic chemistry tripped her up, physics nearly sank her, and their parents swooped in. Tutors appeared, $200 an hour, paid without a blink. When Emily bombed her first MCAT, they funded a $3,000 prep course, her second score climbing to a respectable 510. Claire aced hers on the first try, 98th percentile, a number she'd earned alone with free online practice tests. And Linda's response was a distracted, "That's nice, dear," over the phone, mid-packing for Emily's volleyball semifinals. Michigan Medical School brought them back together, 4 years of shared exhaustion and triumphs. They studied side by side in the library, swapped notes during anatomy dissections, cheered each other through brutal rotations, Claire in neurosurgery, Emily in psychiatry. Claire never resented Emily. She loved her twin, her mirror in so many ways. Emily didn't orchestrate their parents' favoritism. She just rode its current, sometimes glancing back with a flicker of unease she never voiced. Claire thought med school might level the field, their identical diplomas a chance for Linda and Robert to see them as equals. Instead, the gap widened. When Claire presented her neurovascular research at a national conference, her parents were at Emily's community service awards ceremony, texting Claire a belated "congrats" while posting Emily's trophy on Facebook. Everything shifted in their final year. Dr. Eleanor Grayson, a neurosurgical titan with a reputation for spotting brilliance, noticed Claire's work on pediatric brain injuries. She'd cornered Claire after a seminar, her piercing blue eyes locking onto her. "You see patterns, Claire. Connections others miss. That's rare." Under Grayson's wing, Claire thrived, her research blossoming into something groundbreaking. For the first time, someone saw her, not as Emily's quieter half, but as a force of her own. If only her parents could have looked at her that way, even once. The sedan jolted over a pothole, snapping Claire back to the present as she pulled into the medical school parking lot. Her hands tightened on the wheel, the weight of yesterday's confrontation still pressing on her chest. Linda and Robert's favoritism wasn't just a series of slights. It was a lens that distorted their entire family. Emily got the spotlight, the safety net, the celebration tomorrow night. Claire got resourceful, a word that excused their neglect while demanding she prove herself again and again. She killed the engine, the silence heavy, and glanced at her phone. Dr. Grayson's text glowed. "Meet me in my office, 8:30 sharp." Claire stepped out, the diploma tucked under her arm, her navy coat flapping in the Michigan wind. The campus loomed ahead, its red brick buildings stark against the gray sky. She crossed the quad, her boots crunching on gravel, her mind churning. The Patterson Fellowship, Johns Hopkins, a dream she'd whispered to herself during sleepless nights, hovered on the edge of possibility. Whatever Dr. Grayson had to say, it was big, and it was hers. But tomorrow's party, with its banner and its guests and its celebration of Emily's achievement, loomed like a storm cloud. Claire reached the faculty building, her breath fogging in the cold, and pushed through the doors. The roots of her divergence with Emily ran deep, but something was shifting, and she was about to find out how far it would take her. The faculty building at Michigan Medical School stood quiet in the early morning, its red brick walls absorbing the faint hum of campus life waking up beyond the glass doors. Claire Monroe pushed inside, her boots echoing against the tiled floor, the weight of her medical school diploma tucked under her arm, like a talisman. The clock above the reception desk read 8:27 a.m., and her pulse quickened as she climbed the stairs to Dr. Eleanor Grayson's office. The text from last night: "Need to speak with you urgently about the Patterson Fellowship." Big news had kept her awake, a restless mix of hope and dread churning in her chest. After the sting of her parents' favoritism in the Cleveland kitchen, this meeting felt like a lifeline, or a reckoning she wasn't sure she was ready for. Dr. Grayson's office door stood ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. Claire knocked lightly, her knuckles barely grazing the wood, and a voice called out, "Come in, Claire." She stepped inside, the familiar scent of old books and antiseptic greeting her. The room was a shrine to a storied career, walls lined with framed awards, shelves stacked with published papers, photos of Dr. Grayson shaking hands with medical giants from Boston to Berlin. The woman herself sat behind a mahogany desk, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun, her blue eyes sharp and unyielding. At 60-something, she carried an elegance that commanded attention, her crimson blazer a bold slash against the muted tones of the office. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to the leather chair across from her, a rare smile tugging at her lips. Claire sank into the seat, setting the diploma on her lap, her hands fidgeting with the frame's edges. "You wanted to see me about the Patterson Fellowship?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Dr. Grayson leaned forward, her gaze locking onto Claire's with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "I've got extraordinary news," she said, pausing for effect, her expression carefully neutral. "The committee at Johns Hopkins has made their decision." Claire's heart thudded against her ribs, the room shrinking to the space between them. "They've selected you, Claire. Congratulations, Doctor. Monroe, you're going to Baltimore." The words crashed over her like a wave, joy and disbelief surging in equal measure. The Patterson Fellowship, the most prestigious neurosurgical research position in the country, a single slot for one graduating medical student nationwide, was hers. Claire stammered, her throat tightening. "I don't know what to say." Dr. Grayson's smile widened, genuine and warm. "You earned this," she said firmly. "Your research on neurovascular regeneration after traumatic brain injuries blew them away. They loved your dual approach, surgical innovation paired with pharmacological intervention. Groundbreaking, they called it. The fellowship comes with a stipend, housing, and full loan forgiveness. You're debt-free, Claire, just like your sister, but on your own terms. Debt-free." The phrase hit her like a thunderclap, shattering the weight of her parents' unequal support. No more $120,000 looming over her. No more late-night shifts to scrape by while Linda and Robert bankrolled Emily's path. This was hers, earned through sleepless nights in the lab, through every moment she'd pushed herself when no one else cared to notice. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back, a shaky laugh escaping instead. "Thank you," she whispered, then louder. "Thank you, Doctor. Grayson, this means everything." "There's more," Dr. Grayson said, her eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief. "Your parents invited me to Emily's celebration tonight, courtesy to faculty, I assume, not knowing our connection. I'd like to announce your fellowship there, if you're comfortable with it. Let the room know what you've achieved." Claire's stomach dropped, the elation colliding with a sudden knot of unease. Tonight's party, Emily's debt-free celebration, a rooftop extravaganza in Detroit, was already a raw wound. The banner would read, "Congratulations, Doctor." Emily, her name absent, her parents parading Emily's success while sidelining her own. "I don't know," she said, her voice faltering. "It's supposed to be Emily's night. My parents might think I'm trying to steal her spotlight." Dr. Grayson's expression hardened, a steely edge cutting through her warmth. "Claire, I've watched your family dynamic for 2 years. Hospital functions, casual chats with your parents. I've seen how they talk about you and Emily. I get your hesitation, but recognition like this, sometimes it needs to be public to stick. If they hear it privately, they'll brush it off. Call it luck, not merit. This is your moment." Claire swallowed, her mind racing. Dr. Grayson was right. Linda and Robert had a knack for minimizing her wins, spinning them into footnotes while Emily's shone in bold. The fellowship wasn't just a prize, it was proof, a chance to stand in the light they'd always denied her. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket, interrupting the silence. She pulled it out, 2 texts, the first from Emily. "Mom's going overboard for tonight. It's embarrassing. Wish she'd celebrate both of us graduating. See you there?" Claire blinked, startled. Emily had never hinted at the imbalance before. Did she see it too? The second was from Linda. "Don't forget business casual for tonight. Let Emily have her moment. It's important to her." The contrast jarred her, Linda's plea a stark reminder of where their priorities lay. She tucked the phone away, meeting Dr. Grayson's gaze. "Okay," she said slowly, a resolve hardening in her chest. "You can announce it?" Dr. Grayson nodded, a glint of approval in her eyes. "Good. I'll see you tonight then. Wear something that makes you feel unstoppable." Claire managed a small smile, rising from the chair, the diploma lighter in her hands now. She stepped into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind her, and leaned against the wall, letting the news sink in. The Patterson Fellowship was hers, validation she'd clawed for, a future unshackled from debt and doubt. But tonight loomed large: Emily's party, her parents' stage, Dr. Grayson's bombshell. Her phone buzzed again, ignored this time as she straightened up. Whatever happened, she'd face it. Not as the resourceful shadow, but as doctor. Claire Monroe, fellowship winner, ready to claim her place. The elevator dinged softly as Claire Monroe stepped onto the rooftop terrace of an upscale Detroit restaurant, the city skyline sprawling beneath a twilight sky streaked with pink and gold. The air carried the faint hum of jazz from a live quartet, mingling with the clink of champagne glasses and the murmur of a crowd dressed in business, casual finery. Her navy dress hugged her frame, simple but sharp, a quiet defiance against the extravagance of the night. Above the terrace, a massive banner fluttered in the breeze. "Congratulations, Doctor, Emily Monroe." Its bold white letters gleaming under string lights, Claire's name nowhere to be found. She smoothed her long blonde hair, identical to Emily's in hue, but left it loose while her twin's was styled in a chic bob, and took a deep breath. This was Emily's night, her parents' stage, but Dr. Eleanor Grayson's promise of an announcement loomed like a storm on the horizon. Claire barely crossed the threshold before Emily spotted her, breaking away from a cluster of relatives with a grin that lit up her silver cocktail dress. "Thank God you're here," Emily said, rushing over to link arms with her. "Aunt Patty's asked me 5 times if I have a boyfriend yet. I told her I'm married to medicine, but she's relentless." Claire laughed despite the knot in her stomach, the sound easing some of the tension she'd carried from Dr. Grayson's office. Emily looked stunning, her blonde curls catching the light. Her ease with the crowd, a stark contrast to Claire's quieter presence. "What's the guest list like?" Claire asked, scanning the terrace. Emily rolled her eyes. "Ridiculous. Mom invited half the med school. Dean Wilson's here, faculty, even some old profs. It's mortifying." Claire followed her gaze and froze. Dean Wilson stood near the bar, chatting with their father, Robert, his gray suit impeccable. Nearby, Linda flitted between tables, her auburn hair swept up, a champagne flute in hand as she played the perfect hostess. The terrace was a spectacle, linen-draped tables with floral centerpieces, a cake emblazoned with Dr. Emily in icing, a slideshow looping photos of Emily's med school journey on a massive screen. Claire appeared in a few, always in the background, a footnote to her twin's spotlight. "They went all out," Claire said, her voice tight. Emily's smile faltered, her voice dropping. "Too all out? And why just for me? We both graduated, Claire. We both worked our asses off." The words caught Claire off guard, loosening the knot in her chest. Emily had never said it so plainly. Did she see the imbalance too? Before Claire could respond, Linda appeared, her smile bright but her eyes sharp. "Claire, Emily, perfect timing. The Hendersons just arrived, Emily. You remember Thomas Henderson, chief of surgery at Cleveland Memorial. Come say hello." She took Emily's arm, pulling her away with practiced ease, then glanced back at Claire. "Oh, Claire, could you check if the caterers have the gluten-free options out? Cousin Beth's being fussy again." And just like that, Claire was relegated to errand girl, while Emily was ushered toward a VIP, her parents' priorities as clear as the banner overhead. Claire nodded stiffly, weaving through the crowd to the catering table, her hands clenched at her sides. The staff confirmed the gluten-free trays were out, but the task felt like a slap, another moment where she was pushed aside while Emily shone. She lingered near the edge of the terrace, watching Linda introduce Emily to Dr. Margaret Wu, chief neurosurgeon at Detroit Medical Center. Robert joined them, his broad shoulders squared with pride, and Claire's stomach twisted. Were they angling for Emily's residency spot through connections? Her own application to the same program sat unmentioned, her research credentials apparently invisible to her parents. A familiar figure stepped into her peripheral vision, Dr. Eleanor Grayson, striking in a crimson pantsuit that turned heads without effort. She crossed the terrace with purpose, her silver hair glinting under the lights, and enveloped Claire in a warm embrace. Claire, she said with a chuckle, correcting herself. "You look ready. Are you set for our announcement?" Claire hesitated, her eyes flickering to the banner, the cake, the slideshow. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "The timing feels complicated. This is Emily's night. Dr. Grayson surveyed the scene, her gaze lingering on the Dr. Emily branding, the photos that sidelined Claire, the way Linda and Robert orbited their favorite twin. "I see," she said quietly, her tone measured but firm. "More complicated than I realized." Across the terrace, Robert spotted Dr. Grayson and approached, Linda and Emily in tow, a small entourage trailing behind. "Dr. Grayson, what an honor to have you here," he said, extending a hand. "I understand you've worked with Claire some?" Dr. Grayson raised an eyebrow, shaking his hand with a cool smile. "Some? Claire's been my primary research partner for 2 years. Her work on traumatic brain injuries was instrumental to our study's success." Linda's smile faltered, a vague, "how nice," slipping out as she glanced at Claire, then away. Robert pressed on, undeterred. "Emily's been involved in neurosurgical research, too. Dr. Wu was just saying how impressed she is with her residency application." Claire's cheeks flushed with a sudden heat, anger bubbling up. Emily hadn't touched neurosurgery. Her focus was psychiatry, a fact her parents either didn't know or chose to twist. Dr. Grayson's eyes glinted, her voice smooth but pointed. "Is that so? Fascinating. I thought Emily leaned towards psychiatric applications, not surgical ones." An awkward silence fell, Robert's jovial mask slipping, Linda's fingers tightening around her flute. Claire felt the trap of hope and dread closing in. Dr. Grayson's announcement could upend this charade, but at what cost? The quartet shifted to a slower tune, and guests began drifting toward the dinner tables. Claire caught Emily's eye across the crowd, her twin offering a small, apologetic shrug before being pulled back into the spotlight. Dr. Grayson leaned in, her voice low. "This is why it matters, Claire. They need to see you." Claire nodded, her resolve hardening despite the unease. The celebration was unraveling, thread by thread, and she was about to pull the final string. The rooftop terrace of the Detroit restaurant shimmered under a canopy of string lights, the jazz quartet's soft notes weaving through the clatter of dinner plates and murmured conversations. Claire Monroe sat at a secondary table, wedged between cousins and family friends, close enough to hear the head table's chatter, but far enough to feel like an outsider. The "Congratulations, Doctor" Emily Monroe banner fluttered above, a glaring omission of her own name, while the slideshow looped photos of Emily's med school milestones, Claire a fleeting shadow in the frames. Her navy dress felt too tight, her fork pushing uneaten salmon around her plate, as her parents, Linda and Robert, held court with Emily, their grandparents, and Dr. Margaret Wu at the center of the celebration. Each bite of food stuck in her throat, the weight of the night pressing heavier with every passing minute. "We always knew Emily was destined for greatness," Robert said, his voice carrying over the terrace as he leaned toward Dr. Wu. "Even as a little girl, she showed such determination. Our ambitious one." Linda nodded, her auburn hair catching the light. "She's always pushed herself harder than anyone." The words were tiny daggers, each one slicing into Claire's resolve. She stared at her plate, hot tears threatening to spill. Her parents' praise a stark contrast to the silence they'd offered her own achievements. Across the room, Dr. Eleanor Grayson sat with faculty members, her crimson pantsuit a bold beacon. She caught Claire's eye, her sympathetic glance a quiet promise of what was to come. Dessert arrived, mini cupcakes mirroring the ones Linda had fussed over in Cleveland, and Robert stood, tapping his glass with a spoon. The crowd hushed, forks pausing midair. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate our daughter Emily's remarkable achievement," he began, his tone warm and proud. "Medical school is a brutal road, and to come out with a degree and debt-free is something truly special." Polite applause rippled through the terrace, Emily shifting in her seat, her silver dress glinting as she avoided Claire's gaze. Linda rose beside him, her smile radiant. "We're blessed to have supported Emily through her education. We always knew she'd make us proud. Investing in her future was the least we could do." The phrasing was deliberate, supported Emily, her future, a surgical cut that excised Claire from the narrative. She gripped her napkin, the fabric twisting under her fingers, the applause a dull roar in her ears. Then Emily stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I'd like to say something," she said, her voice cutting through the fading claps. She turned to Claire, her hazel eyes, identical to her twins, soft with something raw. "This celebration feels incomplete. Claire and I both graduated with the same GPA, 3.98. We both worked incredibly hard, and frankly, Claire worked harder because she did it without the support I had. A stunned silence blanketed the terrace. Linda whispered, "Emily, this isn't the time," her voice tight, but Emily pressed on, her tone steady. "It's exactly the time. I can't accept recognition that leaves my sister out. It's not right, and it never has been." Claire's throat tightened, emotion surging as Emily's words cracked the facade their parents had built. Robert recovered with a forced chuckle. "Of course we're proud of both our girls. Claire's done well too. But tonight's about Emily being debt-free, a special milestone." Emily's jaw tightened. "An achievement you facilitated, not one I earned," she countered, her voice firm, the tension snapping like a taut wire. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, whispers buzzing as the perfect family image began to fray. Dr. Eleanor Grayson chose that moment to rise, her presence commanding the room as she smoothed her pantsuit. "If I might add to this," she said, her authoritative voice slicing through the murmurs, "this seems the perfect time to share some news about Claire that many of you may not know." Linda and Robert exchanged worried glances, their hands hovering mid-gesture. Claire's research on neurovascular regeneration has earned her the Patterson Fellowship at Johns Hopkins, Dr. Grayson announced, her smile broad and unyielding. "For those unfamiliar, it's the most prestigious neurosurgical research position in the country, one student nationwide, and it includes full loan forgiveness and a generous stipend." Gasps rippled through the terrace, heads turning toward Claire with wide eyes. Dr. Wu leaned forward, her interest piqued, while cousins whispered excitedly nearby. Claire felt the spotlight shift, her cheeks flushing as genuine applause erupted, louder, warmer than the polite claps for Emily. Dr. Grayson wasn't done. The committee praised Claire's innovative dual methodology, surgical and pharmacological, a breakthrough she developed largely on her own while juggling clinical rotations. "I've mentored many, but Claire's dedication and insight are unmatched." The room buzzed, guests craning to see her, their smiles a stark contrast to the boos she'd feared. "And one more thing," Dr. Grayson added, her eyes twinkling. "I've arranged for the remainder of Claire's medical school loans to be covered by our department's Merit Scholarship Fund, a decision the board unanimously approved for her extraordinary contributions." The applause swelled again, a wave of recognition washing over Claire. She was debt-free too, not through her parents' favor, but her own merit. Emily beamed at her, no trace of envy, only pride, while Linda and Robert sat frozen, their expressions a tangle of shock and dawning dismay. The narrative they'd spun, Emily the star, Claire the afterthought, unraveled in front of Detroit's medical elite. Faculty approached Claire's table, shaking her hand, asking about her research with genuine curiosity. Dr. Wu lingered nearby, her gaze thoughtful, while Linda and Robert remained at the head table, their silence louder than the chatter around them. Emily slipped away from them, crossing to Claire's side with a champagne flute in hand. "Congrats, sis," she said, clinking glasses. "The Patterson Fellowship? That's huge." Claire smiled, the weight of years lifting slightly. "Thanks, Em. I didn't expect any of this." The terrace hummed with new energy, the spotlight no longer theirs to control. Claire stood taller, the navy dress feeling like armor now. Dr. Grayson's announcement had taken center stage, and for once the truth, not her parents' version of it, held the room. The celebration had unraveled, but in its threads Claire found something solid, validation, earned and undeniable. 3 weeks had passed since the rooftop terrace celebration in Detroit, and Claire Monroe's apartment stood bare, its walls stripped of the medical textbooks and faded posters that had defined her med school years. Cardboard boxes lined the hardwood floor, labeled in her neat script, books, lab notes, Baltimore, ready for the moving company that would carry her to Johns Hopkins and the Patterson Fellowship. The late afternoon sun slanted through the window, casting long shadows as she taped up the last container, a quiet satisfaction settling over her. The chaos of Emily's party, the banner, the applause, Dr. Eleanor Grayson's bombshell felt like a distant echo now, replaced by a clarity she hadn't known she'd been chasing. That night had shifted everything. The Patterson Fellowship announcement, followed by Dr. Grayson's scholarship reveal, had rippled through Detroit's medical community like a shockwave. Emails flooded Claire's inbox, Former professors who'd once overlooked her now sent congratulations. Classmates who'd barely nodded her way claimed old friendships. Dr. Margaret Wu had cornered her after the party, offering a future spot at Detroit Medical Center post-fellowship, her tone warm with respect. Doors that had been bolted shut swung open, not because of her parents' influence, but because of her own merit. The $120,000 in loans that had loomed over her, gone, erased by her work, not their wallets. For the first time, Claire stood on ground she'd built herself. Her parents' reaction had been less triumphant. The day after the party, Linda and Robert showed up at her apartment, their arms laden with gift bags and strained smiles. "We've been thinking," Robert said, setting a small box on her coffee table as Linda hovered behind him. "With both of you starting your careers, we should get you something special." Inside was a rose gold watch, identical to the one they'd given Emily 6 months earlier for her birthday, a belated echo of favor they thought might mend the fracture. Claire stared at it, the metal glinting in the dim light. "It's lovely," she said, her voice even, leaving it untouched. "Though a bit late." Linda flinched, her hazel eyes glistening. "Claire, we know you felt overlooked sometimes, but we did what we thought was best. You could handle challenges. Emily needed more support." Claire leaned back on her couch, the words she'd held back for years spilling out. "That's a convenient story, Mom. It doesn't explain why you skipped my presentations but flew to Emily's games, why you paid for her MCAT prep but told me to figure it out, why you covered her loans and left me with debt. You had the money, you just chose her every time." Robert's jaw tightened. "We only have so much, Claire. We had to prioritize." "And you prioritized Emily," she said, unflinching. "Watches and late apologies don't rewrite that." Linda's tears fell then, her voice breaking. "We love you both equally." Claire softened slightly, but her resolve held. "Maybe you do, but you haven't acted like it. I don't need your approval anymore. I've found my own way." The phone rang, Dr. Grayson calling about Baltimore housing, and Claire answered it, turning from their stunned faces. "Yes, I'm free to discuss options," she said, the timing a quiet escape. Perfect timing, actually. Now, Emily sat on the windowsill, her blonde bob catching the fading light as she watched Claire seal the box. "I can't believe you're leaving next week," she said, her tone a mix of awe and melancholy. "Detroit won't be the same without you." Claire grinned, taping the edges shut. "You'll be too busy with residency to notice I'm gone." They'd been inseparable through med school, study sessions, late-night coffee runs, shared triumphs. But their paths were splitting now, Claire to Johns Hopkins, Emily to Detroit Medical's psychiatry program. It felt right. A natural divergence after years of forced comparison. "I keep thinking about Mom and Dad," Emily said suddenly, her voice dropping. "What they did or didn't do. I always thought I was lucky because they gave me more, but they were holding me back, making me lean on them. You flew without that." Claire sat beside her, the sill creaking under their weight. "You didn't make them choose you, Em. I never blamed you." Emily shook her head. "I should have said something sooner. I saw it, how they treated us, and I let it slide. I'm sorry." Claire took her hand, the warmth of their twin bond cutting through the years of distance. "You said it when it mattered, on that rooftop. That was enough." Emily squeezed back, a faint smile breaking through. "They're a mess now, you know. Mom cries about how you must hate them. Dad's bragging to everyone about his brilliant daughter at Johns Hopkins, like he had anything to do with it." Claire laughed, the sound lighter than she'd expected. "Let them. It doesn't define me anymore." And it didn't. Dr. Grayson's mentorship had shown her true support, pushing her to excel, defending her worth, seeing her potential without qualifiers. The ache of seeking her parents' validation had faded, replaced by a peace she'd forged alone. "So what now?" Emily asked, her hazel eyes searching. "With us?" Claire smiled, her grip firm. "We find our own way forward. No competition, no shadows, just us." Emily nodded, her grin widening. "Doctor, Claire Monroe, Patterson Fellow. I'm so proud of you, sis." The words wrapped around Claire like a warm blanket. The first time in years she felt fully seen by family. She stood, surveying the empty apartment, the boxes a bridge to a future she'd earned. Baltimore waited, challenging, uncharted, hers to conquer. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Claire felt a quiet certainty settle in. She wasn't just Linda and Robert's overlooked daughter anymore. She was Dr. Claire Monroe, and her path was hers alone. Claire Monroe's journey wasn't just about a fellowship or a family rift. It was about finding her worth when the people closest to her couldn't see it. 3 weeks after that rooftop showdown, she's packing for Johns Hopkins, debt-free and unshackled, her sister by her side, not as a rival, but a partner. This story proves it. You don't need anyone's permission to shine. Your hard work, your heart, that's enough. Take that with you. Chase your own path, because the victories you earn are the ones that last. Loved Claire's fight? Hit that subscribe button below. Let's keep inspiring each other with stories like hers.